Good afternoon, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio, broadcasting on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, the right station for talk. So, folks, today we are talking about returning real conservatism to the Indiana Republican Party. Today we have a ruby red state of Indiana controlled by a GOP establishment that is ultra blue when it comes to spending. The establishment Indiana GOP, point of fact, is not a party of economic conservatism. Instead, it is purely a party of large Indiana government at all levels that seeks to continue to grow government over the expense of your own liberty and your own money. Point of fact, the Indiana GOP wants you to have less and less so that Indiana's government can have more and more. It is the Indiana Republican establishment that has pushed property tax, which we all know is to the point now that is actually forcing people out of their own homes in our own state. Number one, you should never, ever have to pay rent to the government for your own home that you paid for. My family has a massive history of fighting with the state of Indiana over property rights. I know firsthand what government can and has done to infringe on the rights of property owners. My father in the 1970s pushed hard for property rights. It was a hard fight, but our family won, and we won for all Hoosiers. He had a slogan, "This is our land. We believe property rights are human rights." He had it printed on placards, embroidered onto hats, made into stickers, and even cast into metal belt buckles, with the front showing two American flags flying proudly. The inside of that belt buckle had a date printed showing December of 1978, when we had a stop work order issued against my family's farm, which was an attempt by the state to stop my family from building a chicken farm on our own land. This was our own land in a rural agricultural community. But even back then, dark forces in our government did not like Hoosiers being able to farm their own land and make their own decisions. Folks, that farm today is still in operation. For over 40 years now, that farm, which houses over 2 million chickens, has helped feed not just Indiana, but all of America. Again, over 2 million chickens. And that's enough eggs, folks, to feed over 1.5 million people every day. It is an economic engine not just for the local county, but for farmers across the state who sell us millions of bushels of corn and soybeans every year to help feed our chickens. In fact, today our family purchases direct from farms all across the state over 10 million bushels of corn every year. With our farms in Indiana and throughout the United States, my family feeds over 20 million people every day. That is a Hoosier success story that our government tried to stop in its tracks. My father started with 1,000 chickens, literally selling eggs out of the back of his pickup on the Indianapolis farmers market. My family grew that business to what it is today, despite constant battles with mega corporations and government. And it is a constant battle. Even today, we are in the court against mega corporations worth hundreds of billions of dollars who are trying to force family farms like my own to sell eggs to them for less than what it even costs to produce them. The large mega corporations do not believe my family should be able to pay our employees fairly. They do not believe farmers should receive a fair price for their grain. It is always an ongoing battle in business, and that is just life in business. No complaints. But when our own state of Indiana GOP establishment politicians take up the side of these mega corporations against Hoosier family farms, it made me stand up and say, this must stop. It's why I'm doing this show. I grew up working hard. From a very early age, I was in the chicken houses, gathering eggs from age 8 onwards. On a family farm, everyone pitches in to work. When the ox is in the well, you work together to get it out. You don't just pass a new tax. When blizzards hit our family's farms back in the 1970s, I was just a young kid, but I had to work diligently, oftentimes all night long, to make sure our hens were cared for. I know exactly what evils government can and often does do. You're going to hear some examples today that will enrage you. but I hope it encourages you to stand up and join me in our fight against these dark forces that have taken over our own state. It is the same today. I know it sounds incredulous, but there are people in state government who believe they should be the ones deciding what businesses succeed and which businesses are not allowed. We have a war on farmland from the establishment GOP, solar panels and wind farms being pushed on Hoosiers, when our own Hoosier-produced coal is being sidelined, all in the name of the Green New Deal scam, which I call greenwash. And you're paying for it. Indiana electricity rates went up 9% in 2024 and up another 17% just this year, over and above the 9% increase from last year. Why is that? Demand is outstripping supply. Mega-trillion-dollar corporation-owned data centers controlled by Meta, Amazon, and Google are attaching themselves to Indiana like leeches, sucking the electricity from our power grid, forcing you, the Hoosier ratepayer, to pay more and more. While our Indiana establishment GOP, with people like Virginia's Jim Banks, who was forced on Indiana to be our senator with no opposition allowed, clinks champagne glasses with Meta's Mark Zuckerberg on social media. It's enough to make you want to throw up on how out of touch the Indiana GOP establishment has become. But for them, it's all about the money. How bad are these solar and wind farms? Our own Indiana GOP establishment Secretary of Energy even said these large megacorporations should sue local communities who even dare delay these wind farms, solar farms, and data centers. The Indiana establishment GOP has declared open war on Hoosiers. You will comply with their edicts, or they will sue you. Witness what happened with the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, originally funded to help business come to Indiana, but now used to funnel your tax dollars into companies that are connected to IEDC board members. Remember, the Indianapolis Star ran an article on this recently that exposed over $180 million in IEDC funds being allocated to companies with connections to IEDC board members. In fact, that expose highlighted how one Hoosier business owner was in fact driven out of state because they competed with a company connected to an IEDC board member. Folks, that is rot beyond belief. The Indiana Economic Development Corporation must be disbanded and all funds refunded to Hoosier taxpayers. It is a colossal evil in our state that is pushing state control over individual liberty. So, folks, it's not just about the Indiana Economic Development Corporation. Look at what our gasoline taxes are doing in the state of Indiana. Folks, when we come back, we're going to talk about why Indiana has the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and now they want to toll us besides. This is John Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, the right station for talk, broadcasting at 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So, folks, before the break, we were talking about how evil the Indiana Economic Development Corporation has become and how the establishment Indiana GOP continues to raise taxes on our gasoline. Folks, guess what? Gasoline taxes in Indiana have skyrocketed to now being the fourth highest in the nation. We are now tied with ultra-liberal Washington State for having a ridiculously high gasoline tax. Why is Indiana following the anti-car ownership states of California, New York, and Illinois, which seek to demonize car ownership by attempting to force their citizens to use bicycles or ride the bus? That seems like a joke here in Indiana, but in our own capital city of Indianapolis, the Indiana Supermajority Assembly and governor, all Republican-controlled, are allowing the city of Indianapolis to remove car lanes from roads all across the city, all to force people to use bikes or buses. And this war on car ownership in Indiana is now getting even worse. The Indiana establishment GOP just rammed through authorization for the governor to toll every square mile of Indiana interstates. Folks, we already have the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country, and now they want to toll you to use the cars you are already taxed at one of the highest rates in the country to use. We have record fuel tax revenue coming in for road upkeep, and what does the establishment GOP want to do? Tax and toll you even more. We have wheel taxes. We have excise taxes. We have local income taxes. We have state income taxes. And folks, listen to this. Indiana now has the second highest sales tax in the entire USA, behind only California. Again, Indiana is a ruby red state, but the establishment career politicians who love government, who love taxing you, who want to control your lives, they have embedded themselves in our state like a tick that has burrowed under your skin to make removal all but impossible. That is exactly what these people are, ticks and leeches that are sucking your blood to grow themselves and to grow Indiana government spending. When I got into politics myself in 2024, I thought I would be welcome with open arms into the Indiana GOP. My story is literally the American dream. After working for over 40 years on my family's farm, helping feed millions and millions of people every day, my story is a Hoosier success story. I knew and know now my experience sets me apart because I know firsthand the rot that has taken over our state. Someday I have to meet our Lord and answer for my time on earth here. That's why I ran for the Senate in 2024. I strongly believe when one is blessed and able, you have to use your God-given talents and energy to make the lives better for everyone around you. I am a sixth-generation Hoosier farmer. Still to this day, I cherish having my hands in the soil of the farmland of our beautiful state. But that story is exactly why the Indiana GOP establishment came out so hard against me. The Indiana GOP establishment, they absolutely hate and despise Hoosiers. And folks, those are fighting words. Those are harsh words. But you have to remember, they ban 81% of Hoosiers from even running for political office. We're going to get into that in a little bit. You are just something for them to tax. You know, all they care about are political donations from their mega corporation donors. Like most of you listening, I didn't have any idea of running for any political office ever. I've been a farmer all my life. But after what happened during COVID, a bell rang that started to push me forward to lead not just a large farm that feeds over 20 million people a day, where I'd been chairman of the board for years and years, working to grow a business, but to now lead Americans back to economic conservatism. But now that bell was ringing for something else, to share my experience and use that experience to help lead Indiana forward. During COVID, my eyes were opened at how the establishment GOP showed their true colors. All my life, I have only ever given to the Indiana Republican Party and to Republican candidates. Never $1 to the Democrats, ever. I bought into the conservative talk of the Indiana Republican Party. But the COVID closures of our schools, our universities, our churches, all in the name of state control, showed me exactly what the Indiana establishment GOP had become. Folks, I use the word establishment a lot because it is nothing like the grassroots. The grassroots GOP, that's me. That's you. The establishment, they're the party bosses. There were warning signs. The first thing that set off alarm with me was when the state of Indiana sold off an interstate along the northern Indiana border. I knew it was wrong then, and I was shocked that a Republican conservative state would do such a thing. It was repulsive to me that Indiana politicians were selling off our roads for a short-term money fix. That would be like you or me going and selling an arm or a leg and then having to rent it back just so we could keep walking. But for that money fix, it was more like a drug addict breaking in and selling your rare coin collection at face value so they could get a quick hit of drugs, i.e. money. The Indiana GOP establishment is clever on this. They did it with a road up north that most Hoosiers would hardly ever use. But for folks up north, it has been absolutely awful. To avoid these tolls, now local roads are swamped with cars in that area. That same thing will happen all across Indiana if more tolls are implemented. The establishment GOP got a taste of that money, and now it is all they can think of. They are dreaming of ways to spend it for their own cronies. The selling off of Indiana, that Indiana interstate in 2006, was the downfall of economic conservatism in our state. There was no need for fiscal constraint after that floodgate of cash came in. Indiana state government has grown and grown ever since. I saw that, and I saw how they used COVID to control our lives, shutting down our schools and stopping us from being with our families. But remember what they didn't shut down. They didn't close the liquor stores. Churches closed, yes. The Indiana GOP establishment shut them all down, but liquor stores, free and clear, stay open. It's always about the money to the establishment. I saw that, folks, and it burned deep into my heart and deep into my soul how wicked, how evil our state government has become. They only care about tax dollars. The hardworking dollars you earn, they could not possibly care less. Career politicians just look at you with dollar signs in their eyes. The home you have worked your entire life to have when you retire, well, the Indiana GOP establishment wants you to pay rent for it. And if you can't afford to pay that rent, the GOP establishment, they don't care. They only care for the dollars. Folks, I saw this with my own eyes in person when I see the type of people that attach themselves to people like Jim Banks and all these career politicians. You could not get a more wicked caricature of a Jim Banks supporter than the Indiana 9th District Chairman, who is now in jail for stealing over $3 million. Jamie Knoll was also a sheriff. And guess what? Another GOP establishment figure, the Scott County Sheriff Kenneth Eubanks, was also arrested in connection with the Jamie Knoll investigation. Both Jamie Knoll and Kenneth Eubanks had endorsed Jim Banks. That just shows you the type of people Hoosiers are up against. Jim Banks had to be forced on our state. He doesn't even live here. He lives in Virginia. Folks, career politicians are the death of our country. It is one of the reasons I ran for the U.S. Senate and so many people signed my signature petitions to get on the ballot. People are just plain and simple sick to death of the inflation that is destroying the American dollar. I ran to stop any further debt increases in the United States Senate. I would be a hard no on any new debt ceiling increase. Folks, it's simple logic. You cannot consume more calories than you need and still lose weight. We have to cut government spending, pure and simple. The establishment refuses to cut. Jim Banks and Todd Young both voted for spending levels that were in place when Joe Biden was president. They both refused to do the work of actually cutting spending. Instead, they both continually just vote for more and more debt. Folks, when Todd Young and Jim Banks were sworn into Congress in 2018, your share of the debt of our nation as a taxpayer was $170,000. Today, after both Jim Banks and Todd Young repeatedly voting for trillions and trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars of new debt, your share of the debt now is at $325,000. In just 8 years, they have nearly doubled our nation's debt. They are spendaholics. We need economic fiscal conservatives in our Republican Party. Sadly, the establishment Indiana GOP is doing everything they can not to allow that. But I'm trying. The real disease on our country is, in fact, these career politicians. They are just plain liars. They come to visit Indiana and speak conservative, but return to D.C. and vote liberal. Again, both Jim Banks and Todd Young have voted for massive increases in our nation's debt. People like that should not be in office. They should not be allowed near the responsibility of our nation's finances because they are bankrupting America. And you see the results every day. You see the exponential price increases in food, in gasoline, in electricity, in rent, in everything why the American dollar is worth less and less. Did you know that the American dollar has lost 11% of its value against other world currencies just in the first half of 2025? The massive debt both Jim Banks and Todd Young voted for is destroying the American dollar. That is destroying the value of your hard work that you've worked your entire life for. To have savings for a rainy day, to save up for a dream vacation or a collector car, the dollars you have in the bank are shrinking that much every year. Folks, listen to this. You know what Jim Banks' answer was? He just wants you to work longer. How old will you have to be to collect Social Security benefits if he has his way? Folks, this is John Rust on the Radio. We will be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial. So before the break, we were talking about how Jim Banks, who was chairman of the Republican Study Committee, wanted to raise the retirement age so that government can steal more of your Social Security benefits before you are even allowed to collect them. You know, folks, I'm from Seymour, Indiana, the same town as John Cougar Mellencamp. Small town USA. Like John, I was also born in that very same small town, Seymour, Indiana. I've never met John. I never knew him personally, but guess what, folks? John Mellencamp's mother, Marilyn, was my mail lady for years and years. Yep, that is right. The mother of an international rock and roll star was my Rural Route 4 mail lady in Seymour, Indiana. This was back in the 1980s. John Mellencamp was already world famous. Yet Marilyn kept right on going. She stayed on her route. I was talking to her one day and asked her why she was still working even though her son was a gazillionaire rock star. I said that in a playful way as a joke, as like many Hoosiers, and indeed my mom, some people just like to work. My mom's 91 years old and she still puts in 8-hour days today. That is the Hoosier work ethic in my mom that I have been ingrained with. Marilyn Mellencamp had the exact same Hoosier work ethic. She told me she kept working because she was determined to collect every dollar she paid in full for her United States Postal Service retirement plan. She worked hard for her retirement benefit, and she was not going to let it go. You know, just because her son was a very successful worldwide rock star, she was not going to give up her postal pension. She kept working. Folks, the establishment and people like Jim Banks want to take that away from you. They want you to work until you die so you can pay more and more in taxes for benefits that go to their donors, aka BlackRock. As I sit here and tell you this, it sincerely sickens my stomach. Folks, that is what we are up against. I believe in work, not welfare. Hard work is good for you. I worked hard all my life. When I see these career politicians that show up for work in D.C. as little as they do, it just makes me sick to the bone. Did you know that Congress works less than 150 days per year? If you're a farmer, you have to work 365 days a year, and Congress won't even show up for one half of them. You may ask, well, maybe we don't want them to, so they will spend less. I get that. The issue is they don't show up at all, hardly, and just vote through continuing resolution after continuing resolution of Joe Biden spending levels. You know, look at what happened in November of 2025 with both Jim Banks and Todd Young, Aaron Hounchin, Jefferson Shreve, all voting for Joe Biden government spending levels, even though we have a Republican president. The laziness of Jim Banks and the entire Indiana GOP delegation translates into more and more debt for you. We need to send people to Washington that have had to work for a living, not career politician government leeches who don't think you deserve a Social Security benefit you've worked your entire life for. Did you know that 81% of Hoosiers are banned from even running for political office? That is how rotten and corrupt our state has become. People are absolutely shocked to learn how our state treats our own citizens. You can be a registered voter and vote in every November election your entire life for decades and decades and decades, just like me. And the Indiana GOP will not let you run for office. Again, folks, I only ever gave money to the Republican candidates my entire life. But the Indiana GOP is now not a party of conservatism. They will take your money, they will slap you on your back and tell you how wonderful you are. But if you try to run for office yourself, they will use every tool they can scheme up to block you from running. You see, right after COVID, the Indiana GOP knew people like me would stand up and say, hey, that's wrong. We have to put a stop to that crap like closing schools and churches, but again, allowing liquor stores to stay open. So immediately, when they knew that people like me would get fired up to run, they quickly passed a hush-hush law that no one knows about to keep me and 81% of Hoosiers from running for political office. It's called the two primary rule. You must vote in 2 Republican primaries to be able to run, or you have to kiss the ring of people like Jamie Knoll, who now sits in jail, to get an exemption. There are no exemptions for conservative folks. Unless you are part of the corrupt, on-the-take establishment wanting office for a career instead of a calling for service, you will get slapped down. So you think, well, that 2 primary rule, that sounds like it's okay. Well, folks, a lot of people were like me. We always voted in the fall elections because we naively trusted that the process was electing conservatives. I wasn't political other than giving lots of money to fellow Hoosier Republicans. But I always voted in the fall election every year all my life. I don't think one time did I ever miss an opportunity to vote for Republican presidents, not once. That is how I think most voters in Indiana are. We just blindly assume the GOP establishment would be welcoming to conservatives, should you ever want to run for office. But the vast majority of Hoosiers just do not vote in primary elections. In fact, over 81% of Hoosiers do not vote in primary elections. And I'm talking about registered voters, not 81% of the general Indiana population. I'm talking about 81% of Hoosiers who are registered voters and who participate in the fall elections just like me. We were banned. We are banned. They sneaked in that 2 primary rule to protect career politicians. Listen to this, folks. Did you know that Indiana had the absolute lowest voter participation rate in the entire United States for primary elections? Well, of course it did. You know why? I found out myself firsthand. Competition is not allowed. So if you show up at the primary, oftentimes there are no other choices than the preordained slate, often handpicked by people like Jamie Knoll. We as taxpayers get to pay for the elections, but the party bosses actually decide who you get to vote for. It is corrupt to the core. The good news for me is they can't stop me from running, as I have now met their sneaky little loophole, but we shall see how they attempt to change it in the future. Folks, the Indiana establishment is petrified, not just of me. They are petrified of you. The Indiana GOP establishment is scared to death of Indiana voters actually being able to choose candidates they want. Here's a little historical fact for you. I have more signatures by registered Hoosier voters than any candidate for U.S. Senate. Thousands and thousands more than for Jim Banks. Jim Banks pretended to represent a district near Fort Wayne, even though he lives in Virginia. So you know what? Even in his own congressional district, the people there clamored to sign for me, John Rust. They wanted a Hoosier to be their senator. They wanted a farmer to be their senator. They knew firsthand that Jim Banks is a fraud being forced on them. So as a result, I got thousands and thousands more signatures than Jim Banks did, even in his own quote-unquote home congressional district. I was on a path to victory, and the Washington insiders panicked and worked behind the scenes to remove me from the ballot. The Indiana Supreme Court, picked by the Indiana GOP establishment, ultimately decided the Indiana Republican Party is a club and not a party of the people. Even though you and I have to pay for the elections, and even though I have only ever donated money to the Republican Party for Republican candidates my entire life, I was banned from running for political office. The GOP establishment used what is called the Indiana Election Commission to remove me from the ballot, despite, again, having thousands and thousands of more signatures than any other candidate. The Indiana Election Commission is a rubber stamp chosen by both the Republican and Democratic Party establishment. They both despise regular Hoosiers who want to run for office. For them, it is only career politicians who should be allowed to run. So, folks, when we come back, I'm going to talk more about my Senate race, and guess who was financially funding Virginia's Jim Banks to run for office here in Indiana. This is John Rust on the Radio. Welcome back, folks. This is John Rust on the Radio on Freedom 95, 950 AM and 95.9 FM on your radio dial, broadcasting all across the beautiful fruited plain of our beautiful state of Indiana. So, folks, before the break, I was talking about who funded Jim Banks in his run for the U.S. Senate when he was, he lives in Virginia, but he was forced on Hoosiers as our Indiana senator. He was funded by Mitch McConnell. That says everything you need to know. He was funded by Mitch McConnell and also BlackRock. In fact, during the campaign, I had a petition calling for Republicans in the U.S. Senate to immediately remove Mitch McConnell from the U.S. Senate leadership. I wanted to get things done as fast as possible to try to save our country from the fiscal irresponsibility the establishment GOP in Washington was pushing on our country, bankrupting our country. You know who refused to sign that petition? Jim Banks. It wasn't a surprise. Jim Banks, he's a Washington swamp rat who pretends to be conservative when he visits Indiana. But again, he votes the exact opposite in D.C. So, folks, I had high hopes for forcing economic conservatism on the U.S. Senate. My vote would be your vote. My vote is a vote of Hoosier common sense farmer conservatism. When I see Indiana and what Indiana has been and what it should be, I see a state of opportunity for you, not for the state. In 100 years, I want Indiana to continue to be farmland helping feed a hungry world. In 100 years, I want regular Hoosiers who have worked their entire lives to be able to pass on to their kids the homes they have built and owned and lived in all their lives. In 100 years, I want the opportunity of life, what Thomas Jefferson so uniquely wrote into our Declaration of Independence, to once again ring true. We believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sadly, that is not the case in Indiana today. The establishment GOP sees a state in 100 years that is covered in data centers, sucking out all the electricity. The establishment GOP sees a state that owns all property after you cannot meet the taxes they impose. So you not only lose your home, but you now have to pay direct rent to the state. That's the ultimate state establishment goal. I find it shocking that I even have to utter those words, that is how vile and bloodthirsty the Indiana Republican establishment has become. They envision a world of endless data centers. I envision a world of beautiful farmland. They envision a world of taxation and no cars, of total state control. I envision a world where you can still take your car with your family to the Dairy Queen or to church and enjoy the happiness you have worked your entire life for. So, folks, remember this. The next time you're having an ice cream cone or going to church, that is the happiness the Indiana GOP establishment is working hard to take away from you. They will tax you when you buy the car that you want to drive to church. They will tax your gasoline that you use in the car to drive to church. They will impose a wheel tax on that car to even use it before you buy the gasoline to go on that trip to church. Then, after you pay the fourth highest gasoline tax in the country to fill that car up with gasoline, the Indiana establishment GOP wants you to pay a toll on the way to church. The Indiana establishment GOP wants you to now pay a toll in addition to all those other taxes. And that is just to use your car. You still have to pay the taxes on your income. You still have to pay the new Indiana establishment GOP local income tax as well. It is just tax and tax and tax and tax and tax. And we live in a ruby red state, an economically conservative state. Folks, that's what we're up against. We're up against a monster. I hope by shining my flashlight and exposing these corrupt leeches, we can at least stop the toll roads from being implemented. Maybe that shame of actually doing such an awful thing is enough to stop the establishment from actually implementing those tolls. But we must get that law repealed. To do that, we need real conservatives to run in the Indiana GOP again. So I'm asking you, I am begging you, if you're sitting at home, I am praying that God will call on you, just like he called on me, to step forward. Please consider running for the state house, for state rep, for state senate, for U.S. Congress, for the U.S. Senate, for governor. Indiana needs economic conservatives again. There are none in the state house today. Let me be blunt. You can't vote for a law that tolls Indiana interstates and be a conservative. You can't vote for a law that imposes the fourth highest gasoline tax in the USA and be a conservative. You can't vote for any Republican who voted for a law that bans 81% of Hoosiers from even running for office and be a Lincoln Republican. And let me tell you why. That law that the Indiana GOP fought tooth and nail to force on Hoosiers, had it been in effect in 1860, would have banned Abraham Lincoln from even running for office had he remained a Hoosier. You see, the law they used to sneakily remove me from the ballot would have also removed Abraham Lincoln. He could not have met the two primary law had he remained in Indiana. That's how ridiculous that law is. That law is wretched. That law is corrupt. So when people like Indiana Secretary of State Diego Morales, who also endorsed Jim Banks, works to make sure you can't run for office like he did to me, when our own Republican Attorney General, Todd Rokita, defends a law that would have banned Abraham Lincoln himself from running for office had he remained a Hoosier, that tells you everything you need to know about the establishment. They would have banned Lincoln himself. And you know what Lincoln had to say about elections? Elections belong to the people. It's their decision. Sadly, that is not the case in Indiana today. But I'm going to keep working until Abraham Lincoln's words once again ring true in the state he grew up in. Elections belong to the people. It's their decision. So, folks, thank you so much for listening today. And for this special Thanksgiving, when we give thanks for all that the Lord our Father has bestowed upon us, I want to add a special musical ending to this program, performed on the original pipe organ of Borchers Chapel of St. Paul Lutheran Church near Seymour, Indiana, on the very organ responsible for my family's getting into the egg business. My father started selling out sweet corn on the Indianapolis Farmers Market to help raise money for the purchase of this very pipe organ you are about to hear right after World War II. One thing led to another, and eventually our family's farm produced most of the eggs sold in independent grocery stores throughout Indianapolis, based on his early success in selling sweet corn and soon farm fresh eggs at that farmer's market. All with the start from 1,000 hens and the blessings of the free enterprise system that is the bedrock of American conservatism. We're going to hear a work by Dietrich Buxtehude, a German composer that Johann Sebastian Bach himself walked hundreds of miles through the German forest to hear and learn from him. It is a hymn tune composed with words by Martin Luther himself. Christ unser zum Jordan kam. Christ our Lord came to the Jordan. I'm going to read the final verse first. The eye but water doth behold, as from man's hand it floweth. But inward faith the power untold of Jesus Christ's blood knoweth. Faith sees therein a red flood roll, with Christ's blood dyed and blended, which hurts of all kinds maketh whole, from Adam here descended, and by ourselves brought on us. I give you Dietrich Buxtehude's Chorale Prelude number 180, Christ our Lord came to the Jordan. Folks, have a blessed Thanksgiving weekend to all, and I'll see you all again next week on the radio.